Vajda of Western Washington University in the United States. My topic is early Uralic loanwords in the Yeniseian language family, and it's a pleasure and honor to participate in this seminar. Now, Yeniseian languages belong to a small, isolated family that is completely different in its origins and in many aspects of its structure from the neighboring languages, the so-called Ural Altaic family spoken by pastoral peoples in most of Northern Asia. And so this family has attracted attention because of its unusual tone system, its verb conjugation system, but it is also very interesting because of its unique vocabulary, much of which can be traced back to Proto-Yeniseian. In my own research, I am writing an etymological dictionary of Yeniseian with new reconstructions of Proto-Yeniseian that will be in the form of a thesaurus, so that all the words having to do with body parts will be in one place or colors in another place. And I think this will contribute to the study of the larger families of Northern Asia, such as Uralic, because it will give accurate reconstructions and also accurate morpheme breakdowns of complex words in this language family. For instance, if you look at the word for lung, which in Ket is benseng, it looks a little bit like a Samoyedic word that means to breathe. However, it is actually morphologically complex based on a combination of the word that means two or double and a word that means vital organ. So this is obviously an actual Yeniseian word that was not borrowed from any other language in Siberia. Most Yeniseian root words are simply one syllable long, and that also contrasts with what we see in Uralic languages, where most root words are two syllables long. And what I hope to do is have this etymological dictionary or thesaurus completed at the same time that I complete a historical linguistic analysis of the origin of the family and also how the grammatical structure and phonological structure of the family changed through time. So I hope those two things will be in sync. Some of the work for the dictionary also includes search for loanword origins. And loanwords to and from Yeniseian with the Turkic, Mongolic, and Tungusic families has already been accomplished thanks to collaboration with my colleague Bayer Mahaktagaeva, who has recently published the book Language Contact in Siberia. And some of the findings are kind of interesting in that the Evenki loanwords are often suggesting that the Evenki weren't simply opponents or enemies of the Ket people, but that they must have had a closer association sometime in the past. A lot of the words have to do with borrowing realia or lifestyle in northern areas. These are fairly recent borrowings, however. And another set of recent borrowings are into the Ket and the closely related Yukh language, which became extinct in the 1970s, from the Selkup dialects that are spoken to the west of the Ket language and the Yukh language. And these are, the Selkup and the Ket are known to have had a relationship exchanging marriage partners, a peaceful relationship. In fact, the word in Ket that is meaning a Selkup person is Liach, which I believe means friend, actually, in Selkup language. So there are a number of Selkup borrowings, most of them having to do with river technology, types of things you use for fishing, or maybe even species of fish, or having to do with domesticated reindeer, because the Kets did not originally have that, and the Samoyedic peoples did. So those are the two most recent layers of loanwords in Ket, except for the Russian, which is the most recent of all in the 20th century. Yeniseian, however, is a family that's composed not only of Ket and its closely related Yukh language, but of several other languages that became extinct before the 20th century. And two of the primary branches of the family, the branch that contains Ket and Yukh, and the other branch that contains Kot, are able to help reconstruct Proto-Yeniseian. Those Ket and Kot are both fairly extensively recorded. The latter thanks to the work by Matthias Castren in the 1840s. When we look at the map of where Russian fur tax collection demonstrated the location of the Yeniseian-speaking tribes, that's the gray on the map, we also find evidence from substrate river names that Yeniseian-speaking peoples lived in a far greater area. And probably there's a Yeniseian substrate in at least some Eastern Hanti dialects, and maybe in some of the South Siberian Turkic dialects and languages as well. So Yeniseian was once a fairly widespread language family. And you can reconstruct Yeniseian composed of four primary branches of the languages that were recorded in any amount of detail. And the Ket branch, or the Ketic branch, and the Kotic branch are the ones that are recorded in most detail. How long ago was Proto-Yeniseian spoken? Probably at least 2,500 years ago, because there is those substrate toponyms that we find in much of Siberia that meant that the languages had already diverged before the pastoral peoples came up into this area, the Uralic and Turkic and Evenki pastoral peoples. There is some evidence that the Proto-Turkic itself may have borrowed some words from one sub-branch of Yeniseian Kot language. And so if that were the case, that would push it back perhaps to 2,500 years. I personally doubt that the Proto-Yeniseian is much older than that, because the language branches are fairly close to one another. There's not a tremendous divergence between them. So somewhere between 3,000 and 2,500 years ago is where we probably will find Proto-Yeniseian. And it was probably spoken originally in the area between Lake Baikal and the upper Yenisei and northern Mongolia. And that put Yeniseian in contact with one of the daughter branches of Uralic, the Samoyedic branch, which is probably itself a little older than Yeniseian. And Uralic itself, as a family, is probably at least 1,000, perhaps 1,500 years older. The thing I want to devote the rest of this lecture on is showing about the loanwords into Proto-Yeniseian, older loanwords from Uralic languages. And one would expect that they would all be from early Samoyedic due to the geography that you see on the map here. However, it's not clear that that's actually the case. And so I'll show you a number of loanwords, and some of them seem like they're clearly Uralic, but it's not clear that they were borrowed specifically from Samoyedic. And my personal knowledge of Uralic is not sophisticated enough for me on my own to solve these problems. And so maybe some of the listeners will get interested in collaboration, Uralic, Yeniseian loanwords. One word that seems to have been borrowed into Proto-Yeniseian from maybe a Samoyedic source is probably a word that means a net, a fish net. And the word it comes out in all of the branches of Yeniseian in one form or another. And some of the oddities of the vowels and the disyllabic nature of some of the reflexes suggest that this is not a native Yeniseian word, and it looks very much like what we find in some Samoyedic languages. So this is an interesting borrowing, because the Kets are a great fisher folk traditionally on the rivers, and yet they borrowed this word for a net, a fish net. Another probably Uralic borrowing, but I couldn't tell you what word exactly was borrowed, is a word that means a species of grouse that you see in the picture here. This word is obviously disyllabic, which suggests it wasn't originally Yeniseian. There are some Samoyedic words for similar kinds of birds that at least phonetically look enough similar that they may have been related. So I think this is Uralic borrowing, and probably from Samoyedic as well. And it's into Proto-Yeniseian. You can see the Kot and the Ket reflexes. There's a species of fish, taimin, a type of white salmon, and the Yeniseian word also has odd vowel correspondences in Ket and Kot, which suggests that it may have been from a disyllabic word. Proto-Uralic has a word for a related fish called tench. And also that word sometimes is used for another fish, burbot, which is somewhat similar to these two fish. I think this is another Uralic borrowing, but is it a borrowing from Samoyedic? It's not clear to me one way or the other. A borrowing just into the Ket Yuch branch is a word for a Eurasian crane. This is obviously a Uralic borrowing because of the disyllables, but I'm not sure whether this is in Samoyed languages or not. It may have been borrowed into early Proto-Yeniseian, even earlier than Ket Yuch. There are some words for crane in Aaron and Kot that are unrelated to the word in Ket. In fact, their origin is not clear, at least to me. So this is a Uralic borrowing. Whether it's from Samoyedic or not, I don't know. The word for ant appears to be a Uralic borrowing, same type of situation. The Yeniseian word, however, has a strange extra nasal in the plural form, and I can't account for that. It doesn't look like that's in Uralic. So this is another unsolved problem for me in writing my dictionary. Here's a very interesting borrowing because this seems to be core vocabulary, a word that means a young male, comes from Uralic into Proto-Yeniseian, and you can see that the vowel is changed in the singular, but in the plural, the o, original o vowel of the first syllable of the root is preserved in at least one of the plural variants in Yeniseian. So the understanding of the vowels that were in the original Uralic explains what the differences between the singular and plural forms in Ket and Kot. This is a word that is basic vocabulary, and so it's very interesting to speculate exactly what circumstance it was borrowed in, and was it borrowed from Samoyed languages early in South Siberia or not? It's not really clear to me whether that's the case. The word for spring, and of course in Siberia, spring has all this ice. You can see it here in the photograph of the Yenisei River, ice breaking up. Seems to be a Uralic borrowing, once again, even though those reflexes in the Yenisei and daughter languages look pretty different. I can say that they're for sure come from a word that is the form that I give you here, which looks very much like at least some Uralic languages word for spring. But again, it's not clear that this is from Samoyedic. Okay, the word for birch tree also is found in some Uralic languages, can be traced back to Proto-Uralic, and is definitely was borrowed into Yeniseian, but also it looks like into Mongolic languages. And so doesn't look like it was Samoyedic that it came from. Again, perhaps there's an extinct branch of Uralic spoken farther to the east that is only surviving in some of these loanwords that I'm showing you here. This is rank speculation on my part, however. But at the same time, it looks like these are Uralic borrowings. One of the interesting things is that Yeniseian languages tended not to like to borrow morphemes and lexical items. But there was aerial influence on the phonology and on the grammatical structure of Yeniseian languages because of the induction of marriage partners, young teenage marriage partners, into the hunting tribes from the neighboring pastoral peoples. And so Yeniseian, relatively few words borrowed, but quite a bit of change in their phonology and in the way that the words were pronounced, so that the root tended to be pronounced at the beginning and prefixes became clitics, end clitics on the preceding word. So there was an accommodation, a mimicking of the structure of the surrounding suffixing languages. And in the pronunciation of some of these loan words, we have the regular development of monosyllabic or sometimes disyllabic tones in the root word from the reduction of the consonants that were in the original Uralic borrowing. But then we find that when you put a suffix on that word, the tone reduces in a way that is analogous to consonant gradation in Uralic languages. And my hypothesis is that the simplification of native Ket Yuch tones in multi-syllabic, morphemic words may have been influenced by the pronunciation of those marriage partners, those Uralic marriage partners, perhaps from Hanti peoples or from Selkuk peoples over many centuries. This has caused Yeniseian in some ways to be pronounced analogously to Uralic languages, even though Uralic doesn't have tones and Yeniseian does, and Yeniseian doesn't have vowel harmony, and it doesn't really have consonant gradation. I think some of these things have how the tones developed could be accounted for as aerial influence of Uralic languages. When we get farther back, we find words that must have started out in Indo-Iranian, probably borrowed into Uralic first, and then that from some Uralic language, whether it's a Ugric language or a Semitic language, it winds up borrowed into Yeniseian. And the word for bread, nyatin, in cat, is one of these examples. And the monosyllabic borrowed words tend to get these glottalized tone in cat, even the modern ones from Russian, because all monosyllabic words in cat have a characteristic tone, and ones that don't have long vowels tend to get this laryngalized tone, even if they're borrowed from languages that don't have any kind of tone or any kind of laryngalization. By the way, the bread that was made by Yeniseian peoples that this word is used for was actually dried up lily bulbs. Okay, and the word for lily in cat is the same word as it is for star in cat because of the shape of the flowers. There's an ancient word for metal. Maybe it started out as a word for bronze. It went from Southwest Asia gradually throughout Eurasia. And in Proto-Uralic, there's a reconstruction of it. It looks like some version of this word was borrowed into either Proto-Yeniseian or into the individual branches from different sources. So this word for metal or iron that survives in Ket may be originally from Proto-Uralic, even though it's a wander word that started farther away in Eurasia. The Khat branch, Nasan branch, and the Aran as well got more influence of South Siberian Turkic languages before they disappeared in the 1800s or 1700s. And so we have a Turkic borrowing for iron from Timur, the Turkic that you'd find in those languages. And the Kat language probably preserves an earlier word that existed. And the Pumpakol, which is almost spoken according to place names in northern Mongolia, also has this word for iron that looks like it was somehow borrowed through Uralic or from Uralic. Really interesting word for the psychedelic mushroom fly, agaric. Hango and Kat almost certainly is borrowed from maybe Uralic, maybe originally came from Indo-Iranian, but there are possible cognate words or other borrowings of the same word as far as the Niv in Sakhalin and also the Koryak and peoples in Kamchatka. So perhaps this word is much older than Indo-Iranian throughout Northern Asia. It's hard to know. But this seems like it's one of these wander word borrowings that came into Yeniseian, probably from a Uralic source. Then we get to very few words having to do originally domesticated animals that may have come from early Indo-European, like the word for wild goat that was maybe borrowed during the Afanasyeva period of languages in South Siberia that were related actually closer to Tocharian than are to Indo-Iranian. This is one of the Kentum languages you can see in this word. And this word for goat also came to be used for some wild animals in South Siberia. So it's not clear that the Indo-European speakers actually were located directly next to where Yeniseian speakers were. Perhaps this word was transferred through a Uralic source instead. And the word in Proto-Yeniseian that means horse appears to be the borrowing of the word from Indo-European that means cow. And once again, we're having an early source before Indo-Aryan. And whether this was directly from a source in Indo-European to Yeniseian, maybe there was a contiguous population, or was it through another language, through a Uralic language? I don't know the answer to that. So I want to summarize now And we have layers of borrowed vocabulary in Yeniseian languages. The most recent is Russian into modern Ket, and that's not discussed here. There are fewer borrowings than you'd think, even from Russian, because Yeniseian doesn't like to borrow words. Selkup, South Siberian Turkic, Evenki also loaned words into the daughter languages, Yeniseian, Ket, as well as some of the South Siberian languages. But these early Uralic borrowings that I spent most of my time on, the big question is, are they really from Samoyedic? And if they're from another Uralic branch, how did that branch get so far to the east? I don't know the answer to that question. Then the Indo-Iranian borrowings that we looked at and the early Indo-European, pre-Indo-Iranian borrowings, those words also appear to have been borrowed in the Proto-Yeniseian and maybe through Uralic, but it's not clear. Finally, there's some words that may have been in ancient North Asia and spread far and wide even before Uralic Yeniseian language context directly. And so I think all of these things deserve further study. And I hope that my work on the little Yeniseian language family can help inform work on larger families like Uralic as time goes forward. So thank you very much for your attention.